Welcome to Leigh Dickey TV. Hit subscribe to follow along with the fun. Now let's get on to today's video. I used to be able to recite half of each of the first two Rush Hour films in the franchise. I tell you how, why, and which one is my favorite next. Alright, so the Rush Hour franchise, the three films, and the short-lived 2016 television series. Of course, the three films, you're looking at Jackie Chan, Chris Tucker, Rosalind Sanchez. I think she was in 2 and had a cameo in 3. And with the TV series, you had John Fu, Amy Garcia, Justin Hires, Wendy Melnick, some heavy hitters involved in this franchise. But like I said off the top, I used to be able to recite at least half of both of the first two films. So the first one from 1998 and the second one from 2001. And that's probably because I've watched them so much. I remember when the first one came out. I didn't see it in theater, unfortunately, because I think I might have been too young. I might have been like 9 years old or something like that. But when it came out, I was too young and didn't get a chance to see it in the theater. But I remember that my dad had rented it for me on VHS right after it came out, like probably a couple weeks after it had come out, right? And it was a one-night rental, so I got to watch it as many times in one day that I could, and then he had to return it the next day because it was like the hot release, because it had just come out on, say, home media, like VHS or what have you. I don't think DVDs were as big then, and there was no such thing as like Netflix or streaming media. So when it comes to the first film, of course, I watched it constantly. I mean, my dad had rented it for me. It was a one-day rental, and I watched it as many times as I could. I probably watched it about 3 or 4 times before he had to return it the next day. So that basically means I didn't get much sleep the night before. And watching that movie, the first Rush Hour, that came out in 98, and I think it came out on home media either right at the end of 1998, right at the beginning of 1999. Watching it about 3 or 4 times kept me up till the next day, and I got a couple hours of sleep, but when you're a kid, you can run on basically fumes and you'll be okay. So basically what I did. So I had memorized as much as I could from that film, and because I would get bussed into school, like a bus would come to my house, I'd get on and it would take me to school. And I didn't live that far from my elementary school or my high school for that matter. So I would just go to school, right? And because I was basically considered one of the senior kids, because I was probably one of the oldest kids to ride the bus, to get bussed into school, I, really had nothing in common with the other kids that were on the bus. We weren't going to the same school for the most part. And I just, when I was a kid, I was pretty quiet, shy, didn't say much, just wanted to sort of keep my head down, do my work, go to school for the 6.5 hours that I had to be there, and then go home because I really didn't want to go to school. School and I, not the best of friends. So, movies and TV were like my escape, and I would memorize movies. And that's what I did with the first two Rush Hour films. That's, when it comes to the Rush Hour franchise, Jackie Chan, Chris Tucker, that was my first experience with, say, a buddy cop comedy. I'm not sure whether they existed before that, and if they did, I don't know of anything other than Rush Hour in terms of a buddy cop comedy series. But the Beach Boys are great American music after, James Carter, Chris Tucker picks up Jackie Chan, Inspector Lee from the airport, and, Carter's just don't ever touch that radio. And it was just kind of it made me laugh, Beach Boys are great American music. And the other part of that was, I've been a big fan of the Beach Boys because my dad would play their records and their albums all the time. So I got into the Beach Boys because of my dad, and to know that, their songs were licensed in that movie was another big thing, right? But getting back to, being one of the oldest kids on the bus when I would get, brought to school, I would recite the films to myself. I'd like very quietly just sink into my seat and just recite the films very quietly, almost just above a whisper to my. Nobody could hear me because they're off in their own little world, but I'm like reciting lines in half the film, like the first half of the film. And I remember, Christopher Penn was great in the film, like the first film. He's one of my favorite actors, like best of the best. One of my favorite film series because I am into like martial arts sort of films and stuff like that, action films and what have you. So you Christopher Penn, and he's just. I remember that scene where Tucker and Jackie Chan's characters go to visit Christopher Penn in, say, like county lockup or whatever it was, and he just, come on, Clive, get out here, and got something I need to ask you, man. And he finally caves and tells Jackie Chan and Chris Tucker, like, this is who took the consul's daughter and whatever, what have you. The rest of the film ensues, and like just to see the sort of what Jackie Chan does in the film in terms of like his stunt work, you know what I mean? Like how he sort of he gets away from Carter, who's handcuffed into the wheel of his car, and then finally finds the consul, and how he basically gets into the consulate and ends up sort of fighting off like security or the FBI or what have you. That was one of my favorite parts of the film. Just all of Jackie Chan's stunt work really left an impression on me. To be honest, I had no idea who Chris Tucker was before the first Rush Hour film. I hadn't seen Friday. I wouldn't see it until about 5 or 6 years later, so that I was in high school at that point. And I just had never seen anything with him in it. I'd never seen any of his stand-up. I saw the Def Comedy Jam stuff he did when I was in high school many years later. So like this was the sort of the window into who Chris Tucker was for me. And he played that loudmouth James Carter who basically was a lone wolf, didn't want a partner, and then ended up being paired with Jackie Chan, which was basically a babysitting gig when he finds out later on in the film. But they end up working together really well. And at the end of that first film, everybody goes home happy, basically, pretty much. Or at least all the protagonists go home happy, and yay. But when it comes to Jackie Chan's work, I'd seen at the point where Rush Hour, the first one came out in '98, I had seen Mr. Nice Guy, I had seen Rumble in the Bronx, so I was familiar with, his martial arts and stunt work and things like that. And I just thought, oh, okay, cool. Like, I knew who Jackie Chan was in comparison to who Chris Tucker was. That just, many people in this film, like the first Rush Hour, I had no idea who they were. I knew that one of the actors who played one of the FBI agents, one of the main FBI agents, he was in, I think it was Cliffhanger with Sylvester Stallone, and he played one of the goons, I think. And then many years later, he had a main role on CSI Miami alongside Caruso there. And that was cool. I mean, when I saw him in CSI Miami, I'm like, oh, why does he look familiar? And then I looked up his filmography and found out that he was in the first Rush Hour, plus, like, I think Cliffhanger with Sylvester Stallone. So that was kind of cool. But for the most part, like, the only person I was familiar with in the first Rush Hour, aside from Christopher Penn, was Jackie Chan, because I had seen Rumble in the Bronx and I'd seen Mr. Nice Guy before the first Rush Hour came out in 1998. When it comes to the second movie, I did see that in theaters in the summer between 6th and 7th grade. And I went with a friend of mine. I think my parents took us at the time because I wanted to see it and my friend was on board. My parents thought it was a good idea. I was like 12 at the time. So, we went. It was like shortly after it had come out, maybe like a week or two. And everybody was talking about it. There was no such thing as social media back then. So you'd only get like word of mouth. And I ended up, I loved the film, right? Even though I'd seen it in theaters the one time, but again, as a kid, you can remember things better than you can as an adult. Plus, it's been like 20 years since the second movie came out. And to be fair, I thought the second movie was. I thought the first one was the best out of the trilogy of films, right? I liked the second one because as a 12-year-old, following up the original Rush Hour from like 3 years prior, I thought that, oh, it couldn't get any better. Like, that was the better film. Looking back on it like 20 years later, the first one, in my opinion, is the better film, right? You have Jackie Chan and Chris Tucker coming back, and then you have, not many other people. I don't even think the console was back from the first movie. But, to see them, they had to go to like Vegas and on a yacht and things like that. I think Ernie Reyes Jr. had a minor role in this film too, as one of the, I think he was a hotel worker or a concierge of some sort. And then, to see them try and find, I forget even the plot of the second movie because it's been so long since I've actually seen it, and I have them all on DVD and I haven't watched them forever. But it was one of these things where I had seen it so much because, again, as a 12-year-old, as a kid, you can sort of, take information in and retain it much better than you can, as an adult. So I retained enough of the dialogue where I could go from the first line of the movie, the second movie, and then go right through about half of it, line for line, word for word, in about 5 minutes, because that would just, tide me over on the bus ride from where I lived to my elementary school. And it was just, it was easy for me to pass the time, because I didn't, it's not that I didn't get along with anybody on my bus, it was just, I was older than they were, we had nothing in common as they were younger, and we didn't all go to the same school, but it was just something I did in order to keep my mind off of how much I didn't like having to get bussed in, and how much I didn't really like having to go to school or having to be there for 6.5 hours out of the day. I mean, some of the, I guess, more memorable moments that I can pull from just off the top of my head, like, there's a scene where Jackie Chan and Chris Tucker are with Rosalind Sanchez, and she's telling them, oh, I work for, I think it was the FBI or some sort of like law enforcement agency, and Chris Tucker, just let me see let me see your ID, let me see your badge. She quickly flashes it because she's wearing a bathrobe with not much underneath, so she quickly flashes it, and Tucker's just like, yeah, let me see that again. I didn't get a good look at that, right? And Jackie's just like, come on, none of that, enough of that, right? And it's just one of those. For some reason, 20 years later, it's just one of those moments that stick out to me. And then, like, right at the end of the second movie, where sort of Jackie Chan, Inspector Lee, gives Chris Tucker, James Carter, like, his father's ID, right? And Tucker just goes, look, man, this is your daddy's badge. I can't take these. He's like, no, knowing me, I can let it go. And he's like, all right, man, well, thank you. And he's like, oh, I got a gift for you too. I go, oh, all right. So he just goes, yeah, I went down this morning, the tables at Caesars, and he won like some crazy amount of money and gave Jackie like $10,000 or something like that. He's like, I can't take this. He's like, nah, man, come on, let's just, let's just enjoy yourself, live life a little bit. And I forget where they were gonna go, but it ends up with them walking off and getting on the same plane. Like, it's implied that they're gonna get on the same plane and go to the same place and just have some sort of vacation, if you will. And it's one of those things where, like, because I haven't watched the films in a while, and even before I recorded this video, I haven't watched the films in, ages. But there are certain moments from these films that stick out to me. Like, again, I'm going to go back to the first one for a minute, where, Chris Tucker as James Carter is handling a phone call, and he's negotiating sort of like a drop, and the amount of money that is to be involved, and like what types of currency, like what notes of currency this person wants the money to be in. And it was just, oh, you want any fives with that? And it just, for some reason, like those little moments from like that first film, that little moment there got much more than a chuckle out of me at like 9 years old. Now, like, I smirk a little at these films. I don't laugh as hard now, more than 20 years later, but they still do get a chuckle out of me because they're movies and they're meant to be enjoyed. They're meant to be entertaining, and I still find them entertaining and as such. The third Rush Hour film, when it comes to the third film in the franchise, which is I don't want to call it the final film, but the final film to date in the Rush Hour franchise. I did see it in the theater with some friends because, we were talking about it, and it had been like 6 years since the second one came out. So we all just wanted to go. We were young teenagers. We were fans of Rush Hour and the film franchise itself. So we were all like, yeah, let's go. Now, to be fair, like, it is my least favorite of the three films. It's not, to me, it doesn't hold a candle to the first two. And to be honest, like, as I said, the first one will forever be my favorite because it is the first one. The sequels kind of pale in comparison, in my opinion. The third one tries to pick up where the second one left off, but honestly, it kind of feels like it's trying to write out two and then just kind of pick up where the first one left off. It's just like, okay, it's a film, and I think at that point, as excited as I was to see it, after watching the film in the theater, I was just kind of left meh, because I think at that point, because it had been 6 years between the second film and the third film's release, that I had maybe I had expected, I didn't know what to expect, but maybe I had gotten too far into my own head in terms of what this film was going to be like, and it didn't live up to expectations for me, because like by the end of the film, it just kind of felt like they threw it together rather quickly because they knew that the fan base was still clamoring for a third film. But I think, in my opinion anyway, too much time had gone by, like too many years had gone by since the second film's release. Like they'd waited too long to put the third one together, and it just didn't live up to expectations. Again, my opinion. But you have Consul Han back. The actress who played Soo Young in the first film was played by a different actress here. Though I think that they could have gotten the actress who played Soo Young in the first film. Yes, it had been, what, at that point, 9 years since her turn as Soo Young in 1998. But you could have gotten the same actress, but they went with somebody else. Fine, no problem. I'm not, I wasn't anybody in charge of production on those films, so I wasn't really, like, I had no say. But I just thought that, like, it was the weakest of the three films, and there were certain moments. The one that sticks out to me is, who are you? I am me. He is you. Or, I don't know what you're feeding him because he is too damn big. And I'm just kind of like, okay. Other than that, like, there wasn't much else for me to, like, hold on to in that film, where it was, I remember, like, the French nun kind of interrogating one of the bad guys, along with Chris Tucker and Jackie Chan. But that was pretty much it. Didn't really, there's not much that I retained, and I keep in mind I haven't watched the films in a good long while, but I'm just pulling this strictly off the top of my head from what I remember, and it just, I didn't know what else to pull from in that third film, because if my memory serves me right, like, I didn't really retain much from it. And like I said, that there wasn't, I wanted to see the third film, and I got to see it in the theater when it came out, but after watching it, I just kind of felt meh. Like, I kind of felt let down by it. Maybe it was my own expectations as well, but I just kind of felt that they had waited too long, like, okay, yes, you're trying to bring this whole franchise to a close, or you're just trying to put a third film out there, but it just kind of felt like it had fallen short of the mark. Alright, now the Rush Hour television series from 2016, starring Justin Hires, Wendy Melnick, John Fu, Amy Garcia, Paige Kennedy, Jessica Van. If I'm missing anybody else, put them down in the comments, please, and thank you. It lasted 13 episodes, so that's like half the, full-length television season. And I think it got canceled shortly after it premiered, probably a few weeks after. And then I think it aired on CBS, so CBS decided to air the remaining episodes in the summer just to burn them off. It's a shame it didn't get, renewed or at least get a full season order. They left the series on a cliffhanger, but, I was willing to watch the series, and I think I have all the episodes on an external hard drive somewhere, so if I can find it, I'll go back and watch them or copy them somewhere else that's actually, that I have access to now, and just sort of watch them, for my heart's content and for old time's sake. But it just kind of felt like everybody did as best a job as they could, but it just kind of felt like, okay, so how do you take, say, the 3 Rush Hour films and then turn this into an action series? They tried. It didn't necessarily work all that well, even though that everybody did the best that they could. I'm really not sure how I should feel about Rush Hour, the TV series from a few years ago. I mean, I didn't necessarily love it. I liked it, and I still do, I'm willing to go back and rewatch the episodes if I can find them. But I still can't see how you can try and take a film franchise like Rush Hour, or anything else for that matter, and go, let's turn this into a long-running TV series. Because, you basically turned it into a procedural, but with, buddy cop stuff thrown in. It doesn't always work. They tried that with Lethal Weapon, albeit I think Lethal Weapon aired on Fox, whereas this Rush Hour TV series aired on CBS, and yes, the Lethal Weapon series I think got 3 seasons, and to be quite honest with you, I didn't necessarily enjoy the Lethal Weapon television series much, if at all. How can you take a film franchise and turn it into a TV series? It just doesn't necessarily translate always, or at all, really. Everybody did the best they could with the material they had, and to be fair, I wasn't so used to seeing Wendy Melnick in a serious role because, Just Shoot Me, I watched that growing up as a kid. Hot in Cleveland, I watched periodically when it was on the air, if it was in reruns, and it was late at night, and I happened to be flipping channels and there was nothing else on. But she's done voiceover work as well, so I'm not used to seeing, say, Wendy Melnick in such a serious role, if you will. Yes, it's meant to be a buddy cop comedy as well, but it's kind of they turned Rush Hour into a procedural, just your standard run-of-the-mill police procedural with buddy cop stuff thrown in, and I'm really not even sure how I should feel or should have felt about it at the time. I wanted to like it, didn't necessarily work, didn't translate all that well, and everybody did the best they could. I'm not knocking anybody that was involved with the series. It didn't, the viewers weren't there. It didn't translate well to the screen. And I keep saying everybody did the best they could, but I can't see how you could try and take a film franchise and turn that into a long-running TV series. I'm not sure it will ever work, but they continue to give it a shot. They did that with Lethal Weapon, or at least Fox did, and it ran for 3 seasons. And Sean William Scott had to replace the actor who played Martin Riggs in season 3, and I'm not even sure. Obviously it didn't work because Fox canceled it shortly after. But there it is, a commentary on the Rush Hour franchise, the 3 films and the TV series. I hope you guys enjoyed this one. Of course, my name has been Leigh Dickey. This wraps up another video. Please do comment, share, subscribe here to Leigh Dickey TV on YouTube and the Yo Nostalgia podcast, the Beats and Speaks podcast, Pinfall, a pro wrestling podcast, on your favorite podcast apps and players of choice. Leave us 5-star ratings and reviews everywhere, please, and thank you. But I have been Leigh Dickey. This wraps up another video. Thank you again for watching. Please do take care, and we will talk to you later. All right, Leigh Dickey signing off. Peace. Thanks for tuning in to Leigh Dickey TV. New episodes are available every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. Subscribe to follow along with the fun.